How's everyone? Can you hear me okay? Is it okay volume? So how is everyone doing? You okay? You're going to give me some lots of energy this morning, okay? Because it is Easter. If there's one time we're allowed to be a little bit, what's the word? If we can be a little more active, it's Easter. And maybe Christmas, okay? So there's two types. But you're all good and ready to go, yeah? So Judah, he loves Easter at the moment, but his main thing is the Easter bunny. You see, Esther says, who did we learn about in kids' church today? And he knows how to wind us up. He says, the Easter bunny. I'm like, no, you did not. No, you did not. He knows how to wind us up, and he started wanting to make deals with us, you see, because you try and be fair with him, so now he's trying to make deals with us. So it's like, well, we're your parents. It doesn't quite work like that. But he says these Easter eggs, because there's some in the house, and there's some for each of us, and maybe the grown-ups have got a bigger one. And he says, I'll make you a deal. Judah have 2, Dada have none. Great. But no, it's always a good time, a busy time, and it's different having kids thrown into the mix as well. But we've had a good Easter weekend so far. We had our Good Friday service. We had the Community Day yesterday, and today is Easter Sunday. So it's always one of those things. What do you preach about on Easter? Because it's obviously pretty obvious, isn't it? For the most part, it's about the resurrection. It's a crucial part of the Christian outlook and theology. But we sort of go through this process of this story leading up to it. So we looked at Palm Sunday last week, and on Good Friday we looked at some of the key things of that event. And just to recap some of the things, we see where Jesus was put in this position, and he's been captured. He's under the control of Pontius Pilate. He's the governor of the region under Rome. And the people, we see, are given this choice. The Jewish people around him, they're given this choice because it's a holiday and they can set someone free. So on the one hand, they've got Jesus, and what we looked at on Friday, there's this other character called Barabbas, which we don't know too much about, but he's not a good guy. He's genuinely, as far as we can tell, a proper criminal, okay? And what we see in this really strange interaction is one can go free, and the people choose to free Barabbas. Now, obviously, there's a lot of stuff taking place behind the scenes, and there's a lot of influences going on as to why that decision took place. But one of the key points we looked at on Friday is there's a theological point behind that. And Jesus wasn't caught off guard. He knew what was going to happen. And the key point is this, that I heard another speaker sum it up like this before. The Father needed to treat Jesus like Barabbas so he could treat Barabbas like Jesus. Does that make sense? We think, okay, well, why would he do that? Because in this story, though we look at Barabbas and think, well, he's a bad guy, if we look at it through the lens of God's eyes on humanity, that sounds good, doesn't it? In that story, we would all be Barabbas. Does that make sense? You think, well, why would I be Barabbas? I'm not a criminal. Because in Christian theology, the standard is perfection, which we all know none of us can ever attain that. Does that make sense? So therefore, when we talk about this law of sin and law of grace, that is why under this current dynamic, we would all be classed as the sinners. Because it simply means to be without sin is to be perfect, which none of us can really claim. Does that make sense? So that is why in that story, through that lens, we are Barabbas. But the good news is he treats Jesus like Barabbas, so he can treat Barabbas, us, like Jesus. Does that make sense? So that is sort of a core thing that we have to have an understanding of as we go into the cross, because then we know the story that he's put on the cross. And again, we looked at on Friday how it's such a God moment, because we look at it through such a modern lens, but we have to have the framework, we have to have the understanding that the cross was not something to be celebrated then. Just, you get that? Like that was probably one of the biggest things the Roman Empire could put on people for fear. Like, you don't cross Rome, because if you do, we will crucify you on the cross. And it was reserved for quite, the worst of the worst, or who they thought was a big threat. So, isn't it ironic? We see that God, again, he took this symbol of fear, didn't he? The cross. And now, even thousands of years later, we have it as a symbol of hope. Like maybe there's some in the room today, like we wear it as a necklace, or we put it on the wall, a cross. What was a symbol of fear? What would have put fear in people's heart? They would have saw that. Maybe on the hill, they would have thought, I don't want to end up there. Now he's turned it into a symbol of hope. Does that make sense? So we need to look at things through that framework, because this is a God who tends to tip things upside down, who tends to subvert our understanding of normality and take what perhaps could be perceived as bad and bring something amazing out of it, which is also why he never gives up on us in this lifetime. How good is that? That he will take whatever situation we're in and think, I'm going to make something strong, something whole out of this. So then we know, as the story goes on, that Jesus was on that cross, and then he perished on that cross. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Jesus perished on that cross. Well, some theologians, we look at it this way. If we think, okay, Jesus, he gave this ultimate sacrifice for all people, what does that look like? If we think of all the negativity, all the badness, all the darkness, all the sin in the world that has existed, that does exist, that will exist in the future, if you think of all of that, right, let's just say we've got a container and we pour it in like water, yeah? And then we take the best sponge ever. What would happen? We put that sponge in there and it would just soak everything up, right? Soak everything up completely. Imagine it's a really good sponge. It doesn't leak, because we know some sponges that can leak a bit. But I want you to imagine it soaks up absolutely every drop of darkness. And then with that, as all that darkness is contained within that vessel is then pierced. That vessel is then destroyed. And what does that do? That destroys the darkness completely. See, it's kind of hard to get your head around, because we see this sacrifice. It didn't just count for them. It also extended back through time. And as we see it, as far as we can comprehend, it extends through all time and applies to each of us today. Does that make sense? So we may think, but there's still a lot of darkness in the world. Absolutely. But that moment on the cross covered and defeated all of it, even what is to come. Does that make sense? Because that is not the end. And I know I'm trying to condense some key theological points in quite small points here, because the thing with Bible college, when you go in your training, they obviously love to talk about this stuff in many different angles, and they would say, let's have a 10,000 word essay on what that means. And then you'd have to go away and do that. Would you like to do that? Like, no, just bullet points, please. But the thing about Easter, Resurrection Sunday, is I think it gives us a moment to try and create a new framework in our mind. Because we grow up and things are presented to us in a certain way, and we almost get used to thinking in a certain way. And there's, in our current dynamic, the academics and scholars would say over the past maybe 30, 40, 50, 60 years or so, there's been a huge emphasis on the material, on materialism, which is not always a bad thing, but it has put our minds focused mainly on the tangible, on what we can see, what we can feel, what we can smell, what we can experience. Does that make sense? And what that's done is reduced an element of spirituality. Now, academics are also saying they're seeing a shift, that generations coming up are becoming more interested in the intangible, in maybe can we use the phrase spiritual things, whatever they would call it, metaphysical, just things that are non-material. These intangible things, there is a resurgence of interest in that. Because while the material stuff is really helpful, and we've been very appreciative of that from a physical point of view, it creates a dullness for spiritual appetite. Does that make sense? You experience that? I mean, if you're just given something over and over again, physically, it can make the spiritual kind of seem, well, there's not as much emphasis placed on it. But with Easter, I think we have to have a moment to allow ourselves to believe or expect something we wouldn't normally expect. To look beyond the material, to look beyond what I think is possible, because that is the way I've experienced the laws of physics every single day for my entire life up to now, which is a fair assumption, can I say. But do you have room for something more? Is there room in your framework, in your worldview, for something unexplainable to take place? What do you think? I mean, I'm quite a logical person. Who's logical? Who likes things lined up? It's two of us, that's great. I'm quite a logical person. I like reason. I like to have the logic, the reason for something. I like to understand a process. The problem is when I take that into my faith, you come up to certain roadblocks pretty quick, because we're not given all the answers. And indeed, Scripture actually makes it very clear you will not be given all of the answers this side of eternity, which can be quite frustrating for someone who wants all the answers. Is that fair? You sympathize with me a little bit. Some of you are like, I just go along with it, man. I don't care. I'm like, what day is it? Because we will never have all the answers, but what we have to do is create space, or I have to create space to know that something beyond my understanding can happen. Something beyond my own explanations or experience can happen. And part of that is this idea of Resurrection Sunday. Because I'd imagine most people, if you say, can someone be resurrected from the dead? From a non-religious or non-Christian point of view, I'd imagine that most people would probably say, no. That's not the norm. I can't say I've experienced that. That would probably be what we see. But our human understanding, this is where we've got to be careful, but it can be so limited. See, those who know me know I like to, perhaps study is a bit of makes it sound a bit, I'm interested in space, in the universe, the cosmos. Is that okay? And the reason it interests me so much is because it completely changes my framework in which I'm operating from, even if just for a moment. If I'm not thinking of this is, Matt, on Monday morning, I've got to get here or do that. It creates a new framework of possibility, right? An example I like to use, it's probably a bit dated now because they discover more things all the time, but the largest star that we know, or one of the largest, VY Canis Majoris, okay? Some of you will know this answer already, so you be quiet, but let's say we were to take a commercial airliner and we fly around the Earth once. How long does that take, roughly? Maybe we could say 24 hours, depending on the plane, maybe a bit quicker, maybe a bit slower. We could say 24 hours-ish to cover the globe once. So we're quite used to that. That's quite normal, isn't it? So for a sense of scale and size, now this star, VY Canis Majoris, as far as we're aware, it's real, it's out there, a lot bigger than our sun. Let's say you were to, I know a plane couldn't, I do know that, but let's say we suspend the laws of physics and a commercial airliner can circle this thing once. How long do we think it would take to circle it just once? We've got a whole day for Earth. So what do we think for this star that's out there? Any guesses? Anyone think 2 days? That's twice the size of Earth, much larger. We've got 10 years. Does that seem quite a lot? 10 years to go around once. Wow. What do you think about that? Unless they've changed their math about it, it would take around 1,000 years to go round it once. How does that make you feel? It's strange, isn't it? Because as far as we're aware, that's real. That's not some theory. That's not a faith system. That is just something that exists, that is unfathomably larger than we can really imagine. And that is not even the largest thing out there. That's just a star. There are black holes out there, much larger, that is, again, as far as we know, are just pulling everything around them into them. And I can't even really comprehend it truly. I can't explain it as well as it could be. And again, a lot of that is theory, because we don't really know what's going on with that. But something that can even bend and pull in light. Does anyone want to have a go at that? Can anyone replicate that? How do we just bend or pull in light? And the reason I say, a scientist would be much better at this, but these things, as far as we know, are real. They're not normal to us. They're not everyday. They don't fit into our Monday to Friday routine, but they exist. And we can't fully explain them. There's a lot of really good theories, amazing theories, but what we find is all throughout history, the smartest minds of the day have come to very reasonable and solid conclusions about what they perceive, what they experience, which makes complete sense at the time. But what we find is as time goes on, maybe technology changes, and more information then has to be thrown into that. And what it does is shows that what we once thought, what the smartest minds of the entire globe once thought to be true, to be fact, were indeed incorrect. How does that sit with you? You think we can look back and think from a place of privilege and think, well, yeah, but we know better now. But the point is, what presumptions do we base our lives on? Do we base society on right now? That even in years to come, people will look back and say, well, they were just incorrect. They thought they knew, but they didn't. And that to me creates a space to see, to come into a framework of faith. To have that humility to say, actually, do you know what? As a human, as humanity, I don't think we have all the answers. I think there's a lot that takes place in this world and beyond that we can't fully explain. Whether it's through personal testimony, where you hear people's experiences of things that have taken place. And I'm not so quick to just discount something because I haven't experienced it myself. Does that make sense? When you talk to people, when you come side by side, face to face, you see actually a lot of people have had experiences that they can't fully explain. And that we could say as Christians maybe steps into what we would call the spiritual world. There's an argument which is usually used both ways, and I get that because it has its weaknesses too, but I always think it's good to just present as a framework. And I want you to imagine this whole room. This illustrates the point quite well. I want you to imagine this whole room contains all knowledge that can ever be known, okay? So probably far much than as an individual I have right now. So the whole room contains all knowledge that could ever be known, not just what we know now, but absolutely everything. So if you had to put a percentage or a figure on that, what would you say you think humanity has awareness of right now? If this whole room is everything we can ever know, in our current state as humanity, whereabouts are we in the room? Do you think we've got it all? We just own the room. We know it all. Where would you say we are as humanity? How much would you say we know? Would you be willing? Maybe we know. Do we know 50%? No. Do you think we know 40% of everything we could ever know? Everything that will ever be discoverable? Do we know 40% of that? Probably not. We're guessing, aren't we? But if we're trying to be looking at probabilities, it's probably pretty low. Probably what, less than 1%, would you think? Of everything that could ever be known, maybe a safe guess would be maybe 1% or less. So how does that, this is not meant to make us feel small, guys. It does the opposite, because I think it frees us up. Because under that thing, it's like, okay, yeah, I've got my Monday to Friday routine, I've got the things I need to know, but at the same time, as a species, as a humanity, we probably know less than 1% of everything that can ever be known. Which means we can't operate from a framework of knowledge solely, can we? Because you're operating from less than 1%. So we have to step into an element of faith. There has to be some level of faith, of action within something that is beyond my knowledge of it. I don't fully understand this, but I will step into it and engage with it. Does that make sense? Which is where we get a lot of our faith, our theology. We step into this. And actually, when you look throughout history, I tell you, I feel like some of these need to be fact-checked, because I've got a whole list of examples that have taken place in the world over the years that there doesn't seem to be any explanation. And it includes things like things falling from the sky, and a hum that can be heard by an entire town, just whether you're in your house or not, they can just hear it. Have you ever heard of that one? That one's a little more well-known. These hums that just take place in certain places, and there's no explanation for them. No one knows why it does it. Isn't that weird? They've got a whole list of in history, towns disappearing. The point is, not to go through each one of these, but the point is, can we just come to a place of humility where we think, there's some weird stuff that happens. There's some weird stuff I can't explain. There's some weird stuff that's happened in history. The resurrection could be seen as pretty weird. But why couldn't weird or miraculous things happen? Why not? Because I've not seen it in my 30 years-ish. That's quite a short frame of time to be making a hypothesis over the entirety of everything, right? Why couldn't something supernatural happen to you? Why couldn't there be this supernatural God above it all? You know, when I'm, again, looking at it from a more sciencey point of view, have you heard of the fine-tuning argument? No? Oh, you'll love it. It's great. You're like, are we gonna get onto some? It's that even from a science point of view, there is credibility has to be given to the simple fact that we exist. Does that make sense? And again, maybe we don't all have that same framework or belief system, but if we go purely on what the numbers, they tell us the numbers say, and they'll probably change them in years to come perhaps, but if we go with, okay, the universe will say it's this many billion years old, and this can happen over this amount of time, that the numbers would say that just through numbers and probability, when we look out into the night sky, there should be more than just us. There should be. Because there's been ample time before us for something to take place. Does that make sense? Whereas I come at it from a Christian point of view. I believe we were created. I believe there is a will behind our existence, that it's not just chance, that it's not just happened by accident. But if it did, the numbers suggest that there should be more all over the place. But the fine-tuning is this, that it is such a miracle that those conditions were right for us to develop. But at the same time, given enough time, we should see that replicated. Does that make sense? So the point is this, I believe there is something special about humanity. That when God says he poured his heart out, that he gave his one and only Son, that is because he knows us all. As individuals, as a collective, that we're not just sat here for the fun of it. We're not just meandering through this existence thinking of the next thing. We're not just going through this framework that the world creates of, go to school, get a job, be productive, retire, but don't live too long because, governments don't want to be paying out those pensions. You see, I'm being, joking with it, but even though this stuff is important, I believe there is more to life than just that. That there is an eternal soul, an eternal peace that lives within each one of us. That even after these bodies have expired, there is an eternal part of us that will go on. Does that make sense? And as we get onto this Resurrection Sunday, we're told that after Jesus was on the cross and after 3 days that he rose again.